First, we have some trivia questions. What did the sign placed on Jesus' cross read?
King of Jews.
Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. When Jesus asked his disciples who people thought the Son of Man was, what were two of the three names they replied with?
Prophet and Elisha.
John the Baptist, Elijah, and Jeremiah. After taking it back from Haman, who did King Azarias give his ring to? It's a tough one.
Mordecai?
You got it. It's Mordecai. I remember that from the Veggie Tales.
I love that story.
Yeah.
This too shall pass, right? Or is that story? No, what story is it?
Is that Esther?
Esther, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So, yeah, I learned a lot from Veggie Tales, just believe it or not. I mean, because it helps you remember these stories in weird ways because, it's cartoons and they're actually accurate. But who were the two people that walked past the injured man in the parable of the Good Samaritan? We heard of this last week.
The priest.
Levite. Yep, very good. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Yep. And that's something that it's a good thing to memorize. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Whereupon, O King Agrippa, I was not disobedient unto the heavenly vision. Who said this? Who went before the King Agrippa in the Acts of the Apostles? Not Peter, but...
Oh.
Yep.
That was a nice one.
Yeah. Who commanded the sun and the moon to stay still, that his armies could continue fighting by daylight? Joshua. Which day of creation did God create land and sea? Land and sea rhymes with day 3.
Three.
Yeah, perfect.
See, now I'll never forget.
We'll take all the help we can get.
Yep. Chapter 13, page 140, where you're at, and different pages for different people.
Book 3.
Chapter 13, book 3.
Yes, 127.
You're up.
All right, chapter 13. On humble obedience after the example of our Lord Jesus Christ. Christ, my child, they who try to withdraw themselves from obedience withdraw themselves from grace. They who seek personal privileges lose those which are shared by all. If people do not freely and willingly submit themselves to a superior, it is a sign that their flesh is not completely under their control, but that it often rebels and complains. Therefore, if you want to subdue your lower nature, first learn to obey your superior. If the inner person is strong, the outward enemy is sooner overcome. There is no worse or more troublesome enemy to your soul than yourself, as long as your flesh is not under the control of your will. Therefore, it is an absolute necessity for you to acquire a true contempt of yourself if you would prevail over flesh and blood. But because you still love yourself in the wrong way, you are afraid to resign your will entirely to the will of another.
Okay, hold there for a second. So he's talking about the obedience. So we have to have obedience of faith. We have to also have self-mastery. That's real. So that's something that's not typically taught in our society anymore. But self-mastery is important. So, does anybody have any questions on that? I mean, if there's no self-mastery, then, and actually one way to start this is to fast. If there's no self-mastery, fasting is one way to get that going. And that's actually what, throughout the Middle Ages, throughout all of Catholic history, that's what they would prescribe to people as fasting. In the beginning is just self-mastery.
I love the line, it's so true. There's no worse or more troublesome enemy to your soul than yourself.
Yep, we're our own worst enemies. That's kind of, and we don't have to be, because with Christ we can be our own best friend. I mean, once we're transformed. And so I think that's the first part, is you can't be transformed if you have no self-mastery, because you're not going to allow it. You're not going to deny yourself and pick up your cross. So you won't, if you don't deny yourself, if you want to be his disciple, he says, deny yourself, pick up your cross and follow me. But if you are unable or unwilling to deny yourself, that's kind of the first step. And so that's important. And a lot of that, it's a lot easier to learn when you're young than when you're old. So.
But it is such a great thing for you, who are but dust and nothingness, to submit yourself to a man for my sake, when I, the Almighty and Most High God, creator of all things, humbly submitted myself to human beings for your sake. I became the lowliest and the least of human beings, so that you might overcome your pride through my humility. You who are but ashes, learn to obey. You who are but the dust of the earth, learn to humble yourself and to bow beneath the feet of others for my sake. Learn to break your own will and to give yourself to all subjection. Direct your wrath against yourself, and do not allow pride to rule over you, but show yourself to be so submissive, so insignificant, that all may walk over you and trample you underfoot. Dude, this is like sorry.
Like the mud in the streets. It says like the mud in the street. Actually, this reminds me of what St. Francis said of his perfect joy. It's when he was begging and they basically beat him and stripped him of his clothes, and he said that's perfect joy. And I think we don't understand that part of humility. And God's not saying, we do definitely need to have this radical breaking of our self-will and our pride, because typically that'll be our worst enemy, because we won't submit to God in a lot of ways because we're too concerned with ourselves. And so learn to humble yourself. It says, and to bow beneath the feet of others for my sake. And so that's not pleasant, because typically we put ourselves first, right? That's our human nature, is to me, especially in this time where self-sacrifice is kind of looked down upon, then, versus, in times past, that self-sacrifice, it's all about me, the me generation they talk about, right? What's that? That's, if it feels good, do it. That's hedonism. So it's all about, if it's good, it's what's good for me. What's in it for me? I want to know what's in it for me. That's, kind of selfishness and pride. And I think what he's saying is we have to take a radical approach to kind of have this self-mastery, this humility that's needed to actually be able to serve God in the way we ought to, because we do get in the way, especially if it's gone to a certain extent. And I think that's where, and we can't even do it on our own. That's the secret here, is you can't do any of this on your own without the grace of God. You can't even want to do it without God giving you the grace to want to do it. So we can't even have this thought, well, I want to be closer to God, I want to be humble, I want to be, without God actually first putting that desire in our heart. And I think that's what we have to understand. It's all God in a lot of ways. But we still have to have those micro yeses all the way along. It's like, yeah. And I think some of it takes time. I mean, I typically say, well, if it took you 30, 40 years to screw yourself up, it might take more than a few days to get better, and I think that's where we don't want to be too harsh on ourselves. We got to just allow God to transform us. So keep going. Some of it's hard to read, but
Okay, if it's okay, if I could reread that little paragraph?
Sure.
That was a lot. All right, direct your wrath against yourself, and do not allow pride to rule over you, but show yourself to be so submissive, so insignificant, that all may walk over you and trample you underfoot like the mud in the streets. What have you to complain of, vain person? O wretched sinner that you are, what answer can you justly make to those who rebuke you? Since you have so often offended God and so often deserved the punishment of hell. In spite of all this, my merciful eye has spared you, for your soul is precious in my sight, so that you might know my great love for you and be ever grateful to me in return, and give yourself to perfect and true humility, and suffer the contempt of others for my sake.
Those that have been given much love much. I mean, that's kind of a principle too. And so we don't realize how much we've been given, because if we've taken everything for granted, and if we think we have, my problem is I don't have any problems, then you really have a problem. And I think that's the first part that you have to realize, is that we do have a problem, because we are filled with inordinate self-love. We're filled with pride. We're filled with, all the things that are basically separating us from God. And sometimes it takes some harsh measures to get yourself in line. And typically we don't do anything that, you first pray about it. God will guide you. He's leading us all on a path, and sometimes it's a long and painful path, where it's 30, 40 years. I mean, think about St. Augustine. I mean, he had this pursuit for 30, 40 years. And finally, when he came to Christ, he became, probably the greatest theologian besides St. Augustine that we ever had. But it wasn't an easy process. I mean, he said, make me holy, but not yet. And he loved his sin more than he loved God. And he admitted it. If you read Confessions, that's what, he said, I'm a slave to my sexual sins, was his problem. And I mean, he's actually the remedy for most of our society today. I mean, that's what we should be going to, is St. Augustine, because our whole culture is awash in filth. And so we need someone like St. Augustine, who had the same problems. I mean, he had, he liked fooling around all the time. I mean, he didn't think anything of it. And he's like, well, but it was St. Monica praying for him. And so I think we can look at her as the model, because God heard her prayer and he granted him exceptional graces, where he actually was called, and he kept getting called and kept getting called, and eventually, he was converted and he became a great saint. So I think we'll stop there, because I want to get into Sirach today. So stop.